So back in March 2019,
Mhm.
I suffered a very severe mental health breakdown after a relationship that lasted for 4.5 years. And it wasn't a normal heartbreak situation. It wasn't normal grief. It was a collapse of my psychic architecture. It was a complete collapse of reality itself. I felt unreal. I felt depersonalized, derealized, dissociative. I felt in fear of my own thoughts, my own way of perceiving the world. My perception all of a sudden had shifted. The way I saw myself had shifted. The way I saw the outside world, relationships. What had happened to me all of a sudden felt like it was like a dreamscape that had turned into a nightmare. Um, And there was this profound loss of identity, a profound loss of life force that was available to me.
Mhm.
It was just gone. It was shattered. And I think for 6 months after the relationship, I had spent in this cycle of self destruction, self annihilation, um, idealizing this person, feeling like I wanted them back desperately. Like there was
Mhm.
the only hope for me was to allow this person to come back into my life and heal me. And I couldn't understand why there was
Mhm.
this coldness around this person, why all of a sudden there was just this devastating absence that appeared through every single moment that you could think of in the relationship. And then eventually I found Professor Sam Vaknin's work.
Mhm.
And as you've quite rightly said in your episode 29, your mind gets blown by understanding his frameworks of how he explains the shared fantasy, the dual mothership,
Mhm.
the four
Mhm.
S's, the cathectic um, shifts between object cathexis, hypercathexis,
Mhm.
hypocathexis, decathexis, and anticathexis, which really means spotting somebody, they are an object that I'm going to now try and attach to. And
Uh-huh.
then the hypercathexis is the idealization. So it's spotting, auditioning, and the love bombing. Then they idealize you. And then we go through these cycles of hypocathexis and re-idealization. So devaluation cycles and Hoover cycles. And then eventually
Uh-huh.
we go to decathexis, which is the discard. And then anticathexis is them reinvesting their energy into a new object. So it's the
Yes.
creation of the shared fantasy with a new person. And we torture ourselves for quite some time trying to work out what is happening. And Professor Sam Vaknin really laid it out with the dual mothership, understanding that we became a maternal figure. But in consequence of that, we also became a child. We got regressed. We got brought back through idealization. We get brought back to a developmental position because idealization is an infantile defense. And because we're creating a new self concept with these people and it's getting idealized, and we co idealize, it's not just them doing the idealization, we're doing it too. It means that we acquire them as a regulating object as much as we become a regulating object for them because it's interpersonal, right? It's
Yes.
between two people, but it's also intrapsychic. It's also going on inside the mind. So there are object relations happening. We just don't realize that the narcissist doesn't do object relations. They don't have object constancy. In other words, they can't hold you as a separate individual. You are part of them. So they have objectless relations. And we don't realize that until the relationship ends, until we get to that point. And, I think what Professor Vaknin laid out so clearly was just how these cycles work, how the speech patterns work, how the devaluation cycles and re-idealization, how that's about engulfment and enmeshment, and how that's about hyper independency and not wanting to be dependent on another object, and why there's this push and pull between the bad object and its relationship to mother. And it's mind blowing once we get in there. It's an incredibly complex
Yeah.
relational scenario to work out. So I really just wanted to map my collapse and try and work out exactly what had happened to me, because I can remember sitting on my therapist chair after a friend recommended me to go and see a therapist because I had suicidal ideation. I was really, really struggling with life, and I couldn't make sense of myself or anything in it.
Yeah.
And I can remember sitting on the therapist chair and saying, I'm going to work out exactly what's happened to my mind, because it's such a departure from who I was. So, and I'm sure this resonates with everybody who has been, abused by a disordered person.
Yes.
So it was really about how am I going to take Professor Vaknin's frameworks and then sort of mirror that onto the survivor. And that's what I
Yes.
doing. And I set about doing it just by examining my own collapse over a 6-year period, and mapping its way through it. And it was on May 25. I just got up the courage to send it. I'd already written the theory out. I'd written nearly a full academic paper at this point, and I just thought, bugger, I'm going to send it to.
Why not? Send it.
And within a day, he was back to me saying, this needs to go into a book. So, and that's what happened. So, it was just about, for me, we need to see what happened inside our minds post-discard, because it seems so chaotic. It seems like there's no pattern to it, but there's a very distinct pattern to our collapse, and I have it all mapped. So I'll lay it out. I'll lay it out in very simple terms for you.
Please.
So when discard happens, we move into what I call the liminal phase, where we're sort of half still in the shared fantasy and we're sort of half out it, because these people don't pull away cleanly. They tend to want to remain friends, or remain in some sort of contact with you. And that's for means of their own regulation. They want to control you. They want to watch you. They want to see what's going on. And then they will adjust their smear campaign accordingly, and then that'll be the beginning of your demise. And because that's all going on, and because the discard has been so cold, it's been so bereft of any emotion, the mind all of a sudden floods with all the unconscious material that we had compartmentalized, that we had split off and buried away. So all the red flags, the uncanny valley reaction that we felt at the beginning that Professor Vaknin tells us about, that the fact that we knew there was danger.
Something was off.
Yeah, we felt the absence. Yeah, and we sort of denied it. We went, I can remember doing it myself. I can remember going into the bathroom, splashing water on my face and looking at myself and saying, Mark, don't worry. You can handle this. It's fine. And that was the very birth of what then became a false self for me, because it's not my authentic self.
Got it.
And then idealization then starts to build that self-concept. It starts to get more inflated, because life all of a sudden feels very alive. It feels like, well, you know what it's like, narcissistic elation and idealization creates this very heady mixture. It's very intoxicating.
Yes.
It's incredibly addictive. And this is why people say it was the relationship of their life. They were the love of my life. They were a soulmate. They were a twin flame, whatever it may have been. And it's because of the idealization and co-idealization. And this is the key part that is not really expressed properly in the recovery space. If you go to people outside of Professor Vaknin, they don't talk about co-idealization. They just talk about the narcissist idealizing.
Narcissist love bombing.
Yeah. They don't talk about the survivor doing it, but the survivor does it too.
Yes, that is very true.
And it's this that's creating this sort of deferred collapse. The collapse is getting deferred from that point of view, because it's being compartmentalized off. It's, we're denying all their bad object activity that happened.
And idealizing because of the feeling you're getting, even though the alarm bells are going off, but you're like, but
Yeah, this is so good. I'm gonna ignore this. I'm just gonna let it slide. And you let more and more of this slide. So in the liminal phase, all those things come rushing at you. All the things that you ignored come, and then you become very chaotic. You may start pleading, sending text messages, asking what's going on and what was this about. You may just have a lot of questions around the relationship. For me personally, I lost my mind completely. I couldn't make sense of anything. I was texting like mad, trying to understand from one scenario to the next.
What happened? Yeah.
And all these stories that you told me about yourself and all the half-truths. So once we get beyond the liminal phase and we realize they're not coming back, we head into what I call collapse-induced psychotic regression. So it sounds very severe. It is very severe, but it's not psychosis in the traditional psychiatric sense. It is a symbolic collapse of the self-concept that existed underneath their gaze. So
the gaze.
The gaze is really, really important because it's about all the attunement. It's about everything that they thought about you. It's the whole relationship at the end wrapped up into one. Is you can interpret as the gaze, and we get gaze captured during idealization. It's what I call bidirectional object acquisition. So we both acquire an object. They acquire us as a regulator, dead object inside of them that they animate into fantasy. And we acquire them as a dead object inside us that we don't realize contains no life. Because in object relations theory, whenever a mother regulates a child and the child becomes an individual, that child creates inside them a good enough object, as Donald Winnicott taught us. So this good enough object is something that allows the child to function in their own grandiosity during moments of separation. Mum, so you'll see a child running away from mum and they're being adventurous in their own grandiosity. And then they'll look back and they'll check back with mum. And they know mum's there. And eventually that becomes the good enough object inside you. The narcissist doesn't possess one of them. They don't possess a good enough object because attachment doesn't exist. So whenever we look at that, we have been regressed back to our infantile self. We have created a new self-concept just like a child would do. And it's that collapses in collapse-induced psychotic regression. We get brought back to earlier states of self. So we're in many ways, we are looking out onto the world through our infantile eyes.
Yes.
Through the affect that was unresolved in our own childhood, which is why we can seem very borderline in many ways during this point. Everything becomes slightly chaotic and psychotic. We can be incredibly reactionary. We can be incredibly projective in everything that's going on. We internally split into all bad. We feel like the bad object because we accepted the bad object into our life. The narcissist projected that onto us throughout the relationship, handed it over to us in the cold discard. And the last survival chance that we had was to accept it into our lives. So rather than us destroying ourselves, we accepted that object just like the child did. And that's why this is so close to developmental psychology.
Yeah.
Does that make sense so far?
It really does. I'm just taking it in and actually realizing when you're with a child and like providing that security, but then as Sam talks about, letting them individuate, like become their own, but also knowing, hey, I'm here if you need me, but I'm not gonna like smother you, so I have to experience everything with you.
Yes. So we don't become the helicopter parent. We sort of let the
Right.
child experience life. We let them fall the odd time and scrape their knee and come back. We let them go out and be adventurous, and when we get this concept into our mind and understand that the whole devastation behind narcissistic abuse is not just the behaviors in the relationship. It's not just, you know, getting confused or whatever. It goes deeper than that, and that's why the injury is so profound.
I wrote a bunch of stuff down when I was watching a lot of your videos and listening to some of your interviews with Sam. And a couple things you said, like the collapse happens, the dual mothership, the shared fantasy. I think anyone listening right now, as they're listening to you explain parts of the collapse and how you felt and what happened, they're probably replaying images with or memories that they have and going, oh. But the key part of what you're saying is like our role in it and like how it restructures how you think afterward.
Yes, it's reorganizing your mind afterwards. So because we've only just begun, we've only just
Yeah, go ahead. Keep going.
whenever we regress, we shift into different self states. In other words, we get ego fragmentation. So I have mapped out 5 self states. One being the redeemer, the next one being the mute child, the false protector, the introject enforcer, and then there is the truth self. Now, the truth self disappeared in idealization. They've been standing watching, observing the whole time. So if you think back in the relationship, you had those little moments where you went, is this person right for me? I'm not quite sure whether this is right for me. And then all of a sudden, you'll shut it down. Another voice will come inside you and say, no, come on. They're fine. It's okay. And that's the truth self. So the truth self has been completely locked away. Also, underneath idealization, we sort of made the grooves in our ego, grooves that already existed, by the way, in our ego, parts of us that have always existed, that have been there to false protector, to protect ourselves. The redeemer in us is the one who believes in unrequited love, thinks that attachment will save you, thinks that if giving up enough of themselves will bring the object back. Then we have the mute child. The mute child is wordless. It doesn't have any words. It only has dread. It has pain without words. It has tears without words. It is the collapse in the chest, the lump in the throat, the lump in the stomach. That's the mute child, because you can't speak to the mute child in a hope of an answer. You can only contain the mute child. So that's the inner core of us. That's the inner core of who we are. And then we have the introject enforcer. And we can think about that as our critical voice. Now, the interject enforcer maybe comes round in different ways. It could be the part of you that sort of self-deprecated as a joke, to protect yourself, okay? And eventually that then becomes our inner critic. And the narcissist, because they've projectively identified all of their relational patterns and insecurities. They've identified them inside of you because it's too uncomfortable to be inside of them because, well, they're perfect. It doesn't exist inside of them, and you were an extension of them, and can't be a part of them. It's got to be a part of you, and that's why you became a devalued object. That then becomes the sort of birthing ground of all these voices that we get in our brain that at discard absolutely crucify us, that tell us that we're worthless, that tell us that we don't deserve love, we don't deserve attachment, we don't deserve relationships, that we're useless, nobody loves us, we're worthless, it's that, you know, incredibly punishing voice. And it tends to speak through the parts. So for instance, if the Redeemer was online, if the Redeemer was in its place in a regime, as I call it, if it was in a regime of longing and idealization and trying to support the fantasy somehow in your head as we know it continues, the Redeemer will long, it'll be full of hope, narcotic hope, wishing that this person would somehow see you someday and change and, would realize all the hurt that they caused, and they would see that you were the greatest love of their life. And, but then all of a sudden you'll get the punitive voices coming straight after it, telling you that you're worthless, that you're horrible, that you're ugly, that you're, all these terrible, terrible things. And once we realize that the parts of us, the parts are there to help us, the parts were there to help us survive. The parts are there trying to stop a symbolic collapse, a full symbolic collapse. And because of the way they appear, they orbit around the absence that now exists inside of us. They orbit around the absence that we internalized that was them. This is the dead object economy that's going on. So we move from collapse-induced psychotic regression, where everything is hectic. I call it the chorus of chaos, because all the parts are alive. They're all speaking. They're all trying to find out. They're all wanting certainty as well. They're all certainty driven. So they're 1 minute you'll be saying they were the love of my life, and then 2 minutes later you'll be saying, but they abused me. And then the next minute you'll be saying, well, I was the greatest love they ever had. And then the next minute you'll be saying, God, I wish I never met them. It becomes utterly chaotic.
Yes.
And underneath all that is the mute child. The mute child leaves this signature of utter fear of everything, fear of your own thoughts, fear of outside, fear of the wind blowing, fear of everything. It's indescribable. The fear is indescribable for a victim of narcissistic abuse. And I think this is what a lot of people struggle to articulate, is just how devastating that whole collapse is as it begins. Because people lose their GPS, they lose their footing on where they are. It's an ontological injury. It's an epistemic injury. So we lose trust everywhere. And as we go through this, we start losing complete trust in ourselves. We lose the trust to the ability to trust our own thoughts. We become terrified of our own thoughts. And then once we go through orbital collapse, and this can last a long, long time. For instance, my CIPR collapse lasted about 150 days. There were 62 days where I didn't sleep for any more than 2 hours a day. There were times where I only got 1 minute sleep in a day. There were days that I stayed up for 3 to 5 days at a time because I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't, because my mind was, what it's like.
Too loud. I do. And I remember not knowing what was real. I'm like, if I could misjudge this, I don't even know anything.
Yeah. And that's the epistemic injury. That is that inability now to trust what came before you, to trust what's in front of you, and then to trust the future. It's gone. So therefore it becomes this full-on injury. So after orbital collapse, we enter into a deadness phase. So CIPR goes for a period of time. Orbital collapse can be both an external and internal event, by the way. The external event could be, engineering bumping into them somewhere, or trying to meet them somehow through a friend or through children or whatever it may be, because you're still full of this hope. And then the internal sort of orbit can be checking online. It can be, constantly hallucinating arguments, conversation, imagining apologies, um,
Yes.
imagining, your reaction to their apologies. What conversation am I going to have with them? How am I going to resolve this in my head? And you end up having the conversation. You end
Mm,
up
yeah.
knowing what the conversation is going to look like, both for them and for you. And we do this for years. So the orbit can last for years. The orbit can last for, say, a year or 2 years.
Yes.
And then this deadness arrives. And the deadness I call inverse mirrored reflexive apathy. So in simple terms, we fall into their black hole. We fall into that absence as we peel back all the layers. We
Yes.
peeling back and going, right, okay, well, there was no love here. There was never any attachment here. That wasn't empathy. That was cruelty. As you start peeling it back, as you know, you could peel back thousands of layers of all the little tiny moments that we felt that things were just slightly wrong. You
And then they all come flooding back, and you're like, "That actually was that. Wait, that was that. That was that."
Yeah, yeah. So the mind does something amazing again at this point. Its last survival ditch is to internalize that absence as yours. And we start living behind this kind of front that's just dead. There's no emotion. And it's not like we've become like the narcissist. Doesn't mean we can't and don't want to have emotion in our lives. It's just scary. It's scary to let anybody in. It's scary to let any out. It becomes a kind of protective measure, because the mind just goes, right, I'm shutting down my energy now for life. I'm just going to recede back into a kind of non-being. I'm going to settle behind this glass wall here and just try and get through life as best I can. And we spend years like that. I mean, I know people who spent decades like that, where they think they've healed or they think they're healing. And it's not that they're not healing. I mean, they are healing in their own little way along the way. But we think we're healing by being this defiant, very much so. I can handle life, but I'm going to remain unattached to everybody. I'm going to remain cold, and I'm going to remain strategic about things. In other words, we don't want to get caught out again. We don't want to bump into the wrong type of person and then it all goes wrong again. So therefore we shut things down. We shut down our life. And we stay in this, I call it IMRA, it's shortened term. We stay in this sort of circle, this cycle for some time until we start making a change. And then to truly understand the collapse, there's another aspect to it. And that's my second book, and we'll talk about it.
Please, oh, yeah, put all the links to all these as well.
We'll talk about it here, because this is the one that I think, this book for me is a much more clearly defined understanding of the whole experience. So I wanted to try and capture not only what happened in the relationship, but what forces us to go from living in a mainly external world, right? We normally look out with our eyes and feel like we're communicating with the world in an external fashion. Our internal world is relatively quiet, so to speak. I mean, we might have an inner monologue that runs all the time. I know I do, but it's not chaotic. It's not criticizing us. It's not punitive. It's there really just to balance things and to be our imagination and so on. But why do we go from that to a totally internal world? We go from being mainly external into this internally chaotic world. Actually, I'll finish something off with the first book first, which I think is critical, because I talked about the false self. The false self in the narcissist we know about is this grandiose, highly defended false self. It's compensatory. It's there to make up for a deeper layer of shame that can never be touched or looked at or approached. And for us, our false self is not doing that. Our false self is there to survive. It's there to survive an absence that's it's there as an adaptation to survive this absence. And because we've done that and we've created a false self inside strict narcissistic conditions, and it's developmental, it means that the self-concept that this false self that actualizes when discard happens, whenever we go into this internal world, is a pseudo inverted narcissistic structure. So this is why we are. It's quite hard to get our heads right.
No, but we're with you here.
So this is why we are constantly asking ourselves, am I the narcissist? Is it me who's the narcissist?
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, because the pseudo-narcissistic structure feels like and eerily seems narcissistic. But it's not narcissistic in its defenses. It's narcissistic in the fact that it's vulnerable and that it is self-supplying. It is not. Our psyche is now doing what Sam Vaknin calls snapshotting. Sam talks about the narcissist taking a snapshot of you. They
in the beginning,
act inside. They animate it with a fantasy and then control it on the inside of their mind via the external object. Okay.
And then when you deviate from that script, they get upset.
They get upset and then devalue you because the internal object is causing them dysregulation because it now doesn't match. The external object is causing them thing. It doesn't match with the internal. They devalue the internal. To devalue the internal, they've got to devalue the external. And then because there's this devalued object, it creates this anxiety, and then idealization has to come back in again, and they hoover you and bring you back in because they feel like they're losing their mother. That's the short of it. But for survivors, at the end, we have this dead object inside of us. We have all the snapshots of the relationship, all the memories of them that we've taken, all these introjects, all these internalizations of attunement, idealization, seduction. So the push and pull inside you is not always punitive in a direct sense. Sometimes it's seduction into annihilation. Sometimes it's just pure annihilation. Because we've internalized their split, we've internalized both halves of it. So we have their seductive, idealizing, highly eroticized, sexualized self that's been internalized. And then we've also internalized their punitive, rejecting, sort of non-there, absent self. Okay? That's the split that is going on. Byrne would have called this the exciting object and the rejecting object. So we've internalized both of them. So in the orbit that we go round, I call the loop. It's this looping.
Rumination, right?
It's just rumination, yeah. So it's just this psychic loop. It is both seductive and annihilating. So it seduces you into interacting with it.
Because in your own,
in your own mind, because of the idealization. Because whenever earlier on I talked about the bidirectional object acquisition, because we've taken that object inside of us, that's why we have this split. That's why we have the exciting, rejecting object inside of us, and that's why we have this push and pull that goes on as we orbit around. That's why it feels like a borderline kind of affect to it, because it's like we can't exist without the object, but at the same time the object is destroying us. So it has this kind of borderline affect to it. Do you understand why that happens, why we get pulled into that? I wrote The Organizing Gate. And The Organizing Gate, can I read you something now? Can I just read?
Please. Please.
just so you can get.
Yeah. This is the way that you're describing this. It's helping me, and I know it's going to help listeners map what happened in their experience to what was actually happening. Right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Great.
it's
Amazing.
need to understand. People need the map. If they don't have the map, they're going to remain stuck.
You're just
The nice thing about this is that I'm giving you time to observe what's going on. And once we can become the observer of ourselves, then we can become the interrupter of the patterns. Once we can be
beautiful.
the interrupter of the patterns, then we can get in charge of them. And eventually then we can start to reauthor ourselves. And that's what my whole work is about. It's about reauthoring the narrative. It's about the vertical axis. It's about vertical reauthoring, So I'll read you out.
Awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to read you just out the start of chapter 1. I won't go too far. There is a moment in collapse that survivors keep trying to describe, and the language never quite lands. It isn't simply heartbreak. It isn't low self-esteem. It isn't even trauma bonding, in the way the recovery space tends to frame it. It is a failure of reality mediation. Something in the psyche's filtering system breaks, and suddenly the mind cannot hold the same world it held yesterday. The body floods, narrative fragments, time distorts, the internal object field turns hostile or hallucinatory, and the survivor, who may still be going to work, still feeding kids, still replying to messages, feels as if their inner world is collapsing underneath. Mirrored Psychic Inversion Theory names that failure point. It is the organizing gate. And at the center of the organizing gate is the ASR complex, a tripartite model of how the organism pre-consciously evaluates and organizes incoming, affective, interoceptive, and relational stimuli before conscious awareness can stabilize it. This chapter introduces the organizing gate, defines the ASR complex, and clarifies who conceptualized it and why. So the reason I did this, and I won't go too far into it because it's very quite complex. And I don't mean that in a grandiose sense. It just bloody is, and that's unfortunately part of the collapse. And I think it's part of the recovery phase's main problem is that the recovery phase has reduced complexity down into such simplifications that they're merely descriptors. I mean, what does it mean whenever somebody's gaslighting you? Well, yeah, we know what it means. We have all these people telling us that narcissists will harm us and hurt us, and they'll do. Yeah, we know. We know that.
Right.
We've
right.
a relationship with them. You're on the recovery space because we know that. So what's it telling us? Unless you can actually give a framework of what the relationship looks like from day dot to the end, then you're not telling us anything. And that's why Professor Vaknin's work is it's critical. It's more than critical. It's clinically needed to be on. So my idea here for understanding the ASR complex. ASR stands for the Anticipatory Stress Reflex complex.
Mm-hmm.
So the mind basically is a prediction organ. The mind predicts what's going on in front of it. It has a latency to it. So there's like a milliseconds of a way of perceiving the outside world. Carl Friston, predictive processing. Go and look him up. He's fantastic. And he goes all through this and he mapped the brain showing how it is an anticipatory organ. So I was trying to think, well, how does that work? So I went back to the child. I went back to the infant. I went back to people like Alan Shore. Alan Shore did affect regulation along with Dan Siegel. Fantastic piece of work. And I mean, just a mind-blowing piece of work. He proved Bowlby's attachment theory was perfect. So, and again, this gives credit of the older classical psychology as well, because psychology needs to go back It needs to go back to object relations. It needs to go back to psychoanalysis, to be honest with you, because it's become so diffuse and so difficult to understand through all
Yeah.
different theories. So I thought, well, how can I start trying to unify this in some sort of sense? So the ASR complex, ASR1, is the annihilatory stress reflex to mute child. It's pre-verbal. It's pre-narrative. It is primordial life force that needs to be regulated into a healthy sense of self. So in many ways, it's like the id that Freud talked about. And once the id becomes regulated, then we get the ego. And on top of that, then Freud would have said we had the super ego. So the id I would have had down as ASR1, our mood child. And that's that dread that comes up through us in relationships. So whenever discard happens, ASR1 surges. We get this intense fear, this intense feeling of unreality and depersonalization, dissociation. Then we have ASR2, the anticipatory stress reflex proper. So that's the mature, reality-mediated, time-sequencing self. Like you and I are now talking to each other through ASR2. We are reality-bound. We can reality test. We having a conversation. We can hold object competency. Neither of us are fragmenting because of each other's words and feelings and so on. Then we have ASR3. ASR3 is our anticipatory shadow reflex, the unconscious mind. It is all our relational blueprints. It is all our dreams, all our desires, but it is also all the bad material that we have locked away, compartmentalized. And when I say bad material, I mean trauma. I mean unresolved relational issues, humiliations, whatever it may have been. And this has been developing in the human at the same time as ASR1 was getting regulated whenever you were an infant. So ASR1 and ASR3 existed together whenever you were very, very young. And then eventually you got regulated and you ended up with...
Got it.
Okay. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. That you're in this balanced place where you know what's real, you're not questioning. But that only comes over time?
Comes over time. So, roughly, again, we're going back to developmental theory. So we're looking at 18 to 36 months old. That's self. Okay. And over our lifetime, then ASR1 may have got spiked. This annihilatory stress response, anxiety, right? Anxiety part of it. There's a spectrum of anxiety, obviously. So anxiety itself would be kind of a part of ASR1, but also kind of a part of ASR2 and ASR3 as well. ASR1 itself has this real signature to it of annihilatory anxiety, what they call paranoid anxiety in the world of psychology. This is what the narcissist would feel whenever they're heading into collapse. They would feel this paranoid anxiety. So by the time we're 18 to 36 months old, that should have been resolved. That absence should have been closed over, sealed. We should have been regulated. ASR2's online. And now we balance it, depending on how we're feeling. So whenever discard happens, ASR1 surges, ASR2 gets bypassed, it goes offline, and ASR3 goes executive. We get cast into our unconscious mind. And that's why we move from the externally mediated world into internally mediated world. And people are kind of locked or trapped inside ASR3 whenever they're in collapse.
Yes.
And ASR1 is sitting underneath it, creating all the sort of bodily and fear sensations that are going on now, both bodily and psychologically and emotionally. And this is why everything feels so derealized and so difficult for us to bring back online again. And because of the way ASR3 works, it's where all our parts are. So it's where we've internalized all the exciting object and the rejecting object. It's where the redeemer and the false protector live. It's, their interactions are all happening in here. So we get stuck in this ASR3 loop. On the outside, we can't get in. We're looking at it through ASR2, but ASR2 is not strong enough yet to come back online. And that just takes time. So in my work, it's about right-sizing ASR3, the anticipatory shadow reflex. It's about re-establishing ASR2, and it's about containing ASR1. And this really allows us to have a very targeted way of understanding our collapse. If ASR1 is firing too much, if we are full of annihilatory dread, then there's no point in trying to talk to it. There's no point in trying to reason with the mind in that point. You need to contain the body. You need to get a heavy blanket on you. You need to have a bath or a shower. You need to go out for a walk. You need to eat. You need to sleep. If you're in a looping state and it's voices continuously all the time and the dread's not so bad and you're in regimes of longing and hope and idealization, then that's time to deny the voices their power. That is time to decaffect from the voices. Sam talks about this.
Yeah.
It's about decaffecting from the internal to remove your psychic energy from the conversations, because the more we have the conversation, the stronger the loop gets. We give it in another way. If you're somebody who has the ability for empathy and compassion and positive emotions, and you love someone, there's an endless amount of love there, right? I mean, it's your pot of there's as much as you want.
You never run out. You just want to keep, like with your kids, it's keep giving. Yeah.
It never depletes. You don't get a warning sign saying my love is depleting, And we have to think about negative emotions in the same way. If you let negative emotions become the inner world, then they will gather as much, if not more, pace and damage than any energy that love can provide, And in many ways, this really confirms this pseudo-narcissistic structure, because when we think about the narcissist, they don't have access to positive emotions. They're trapped inside an internal world. They're living inside a fantasy, which is their inner working model, how they're talking to themselves and everybody else. And here we are as a survivor in exactly the same position. We have an inner working model, which is ruling our life. We are stuck inside it. We don't have access to our positive emotions. We are stuck within this deadened world, stuck behind glass. Well, we're not emotionally connecting with the world. But here's the difference, and this is the big, big difference. The difference is that we're going through collapse. The narcissist won't face collapse. It can't, this is why they avoid the bad object all the time. This is why they avoid their absence all the time. This is why we're so confused. This is why we're devastated as human beings at the end of it all, because we have capacity. So our capacity to feel pain, our capacity to identify with the bad object, is proof that we can heal. It's proof that life is there. Because the narcissist doesn't contain that ability to produce a libido force, a life force. It just doesn't exist. They have to use somebody else as a prosthesis, as a kind of pseudo libidinal life force.
Yes. Yes.
And that's why we feel so drained at the end of it all. But yet at the same time, our minds are on fire.
Well, that's such a good way to describe it. Your mind is on fire.
It's on fire. Well and truly on.
Exactly.
So yeah, my work then has become more about then mapping the individuals, because whenever I talk about the redeemer ego and the false protector and so on, it allows for a broad range of experiences, for each person. Each person will have their own false protector with their own emotional signature to it, their own internalization, their own voices that are punitive. And it's the same with the redeemer ego. You're going to have your own family history that is, kind of leading into it. And you're going to have your own blueprint of what relationships actually look like. Talking about the external to internal world, how we get captured inside that internal world, and now we're looping around the absent.
We're looping around that absence, and we start to experience a little bit of that black hole that the narcissist actually lives in.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Why this is so interesting to me and helpful is that it's making sense of very distinguished periods where I'm like, I can understand and map what I was feeling to what you're saying.
Yes. But that's been it's been the most profound experience for me, is the reaction to this. Because on my YouTube channel and my other socials, people are coming along and going, my goodness, you have just explained my past 5-6 years of my life in one video, and it's profound for me. It's incredibly humbling for me. It's incredibly honoring as well to be able to do that for people, and it's like when you just say what you said is quite profound, really, because you're able to see it through ASR2. You're able to see it through how the mind is now seeing reality for how it actually is, without splitting, without becoming dysregulated, without collapsing. That's a really good sign that your ASR2 is working well. It may still falter at times. We re-enter the loop over and over again. It's recursive. It's recursive healing, because it was recursive abuse. It was recursive absence. It was recursive avoidance. So the healing takes just however long it takes. It could take 6 years to get round the loop. It could take 10 years to get around the loop. It might take some 6 months to get round the loop. It just depends on your own sensitivity to life, your own sensitivity to your own life force, and how it's been handled or mishandled in life. And so I talk about not only the collapse, but how to reintegrate again. And this is the most important part, it's great to have the collapse. It's great to know that somebody has mapped it for you. It's good to know that you weren't going insane. Because your mind did exactly what it was meant to do. It tried to reorganize you. It tried to reorganize this psychic break. It's everything that happened afterwards was a completely normal reaction to a very abnormal situation. A shared fantasy is something that will devastate a human being. It's not just something that you go through and 2 or 3 weeks later you can call them an asshole and get back on with life. That's not going to happen. It'll psychically remove you from life for a period of time.
That's a great way to say it. It psychically removes you. It's almost like, for me, it felt like if your mind was a file cabinet before that was relatively organized, afterwards it's like and then afterwards you're like, okay, I want to file this back together, but I don't even know how the hell this got this way.
Yeah, exactly. And because it looks and feels so chaotic, because it doesn't look like it's been working in some sort of repeated pattern, it seems like our lives are all over the place, And because it is this pseudo-narcissistic structure, because we have inherited that structure, that deadness that I was talking about just before the video went, that deadness that exists inside of us, that lack of ability to get a hold of our positive emotions again, because we have that sort of inability to properly attach to human beings. It tells us that it was a pseudo-narcissistic structure. It tells us that we are self-supplying a loop that is trying to restore the object. It's trying to restore the object, not because it's looking for them, but because it's looking for ourselves. It's looking for the old self concept. It's trying to get those states of being that existed inside the relationship alive again. It's trying to feel alive again. And this is why it's so important to realize our capacities. That our pain is a sign of our life.
Mm.
The depressive position is something that is achieved as a child at 18 to 36 months. And it's achieved out of the paranoid schizoid position because we can feel pain. We can start to mourn not only, you know, the object as a separate entity, but also our good and bad. We can feel guilt and we can have reparation for maybe how we pinched mummy or as a child those things all matter. And I think for us to understand that as survivors of narcissistic abuse is incredibly important because again I'm back to the regression. I'm back to the fact that this is about individuating and separating away from a mother-like concept, a what we thought was a secure base, which turned out to be anything but. And it's where the organizing gate, the last time we walked through the organizing gate, psychically walked through the organizing gate to become, for most of us, was whenever we were 18 or 36 months old. So we're now having to pass back through the organizing gate again to separate and individuate. So we need to reteach the gate that it's safe and we need to separate out what belongs to us from what doesn't. And that's where healing begins because healing begins with a pause. Healing begins with just not reacting to the voices and beginning to observe them, letting the observer ego build up some clarification inside your mind, to start to build up its authority inside your mind, to let it become more of a judge for what's happened than the states that are trying so hard to come back to being again. And eventually, I call it little flickers of truth. ASR2 starts to flicker. You get these little moments that might only last 10, 15, 20 seconds, and you come in and you go, that's what was going on. Oh my God, and then it'll go again and you'll go back into the loop.
Yes.
And then you'll feel guilty about having that revelation. You'll start to get a little, you'll start to doubt yourself and you'll go through all those things. And then you've got to go through it again. You've got to retell the story to yourself again. You've got to go around the loop again. So it's just building up the observer ego into ASR2. Eventually, what seems like a flicker will eventually become half an hour to 2 hours where you fully believe yourself. And then it may go back offline again. And eventually, it's about interrupting the loop earlier and earlier. You're only going to be able to observe the loop for a while. You'll observe it after it's happened. Then eventually you'll start picking it up during the observation and you'll reduce down the energy to it. Then you'll pick it up at the body level where the body starts reacting and you'll pick it up and you go, no, I'm not reacting to that. And it takes a long time to teach yourself. Then eventually you pick it up at the pre-conscious gate level where you pick it up before you just get this little spark and you go, nope, I'm not letting that happen. And even though it may happen, even though the loop may still happen, you're not engaging.
You're observing.
You're observing. So the earlier we can get the observer ego in place as the loop begins, the stronger it becomes.
Why that is hitting me so much is because in recovering and my own experience in talking to other survivors, it's that loop of like, why can't I just get up? Like move, like you try to just, but why this is bringing me so much hope is that I have very strong glimpses of the observer.
Yeah, good.
And this is over the last 3-4 years. And I feel it starting to take more control. And that makes me so happy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it hasn't even fully taken control yet. And I already see the difference.
Yeah. And it's like, do you ever hear people say, just let yourself do this. And you go, well, I'm trying to let myself, I'm trying to let things go. I'm trying to let myself just feel things or just feel the pain and grieve it and get done with it.
Yeah.
But that's not the way collapse works. Collapse doesn't work like that because of idealization. So if we understand collapse properly, we've got to go right back. we've got to go right back to the start of the relationship and understand that we gave away so much of ourselves to idealization. Not and
Yes.
not just that we hid away our authentic true self, but the self that got built in idealization carries so much weight. Because all your weighted priors, all self states that were never delighted in as a child, stood forward in idealization. Every single bit of humiliation, pain, lost love, attachment injury that you had, anything to do with parents, siblings, broken relationship, all stood forward in idealization. And because the idealization is so complete, and because we're co-idealizing back, it builds this incredibly difficult self-concept to break down. As we said earlier, it's incredibly difficult to resist narcissistic elation. Again, Professor Vaknin really tells us the details of narcissistic elation and anything to do with narcissistic personality disorder. I always just reference straight to Sam because, as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
there's nobody quite like him. And he's very academically and rigorously defined in his frameworks. Nothing Sam has thought about has not been looked at correctly. And that gives a lot of confidence, to the framework. But to understand what's happened to us in idealization is to know that any longing and any of our inability to keep looking is to do with those parts of us that were picked up, contained, held psychically in a contract that we didn't know we had signed, that wasn't what we thought it was, that was a true absence rather than a even slight presence. Therefore, all of those parts got shattered whenever discard happened, whenever we fully realized the the depth as to which we had given away ourselves to this shared fantasy. And I think it's a critical part of healing is to be accountable for that as a survivor, not for their actions, but our own co-idealization, our own co-authoring of the shared fantasy. And it means going back and doing a bit of work into our past, looking at our family, looking at our parents, looking at our own inability at times to be ourselves, to look where we've also created false selves in the past to survive certain parental and family issues that arose in our lives. And, it takes a full symbolic collapse to get rid of that. Fully, to fully let go of all pretense.
Yeah.
And it's a very humbling thing to go through, collapse after narcissistic abuse. It's an incredibly profound, devastating collapse that's indescribable in many ways. I've tried my best to put it into words, but sometimes English lets us down even to describe it.
Well, I will say, Mark, just there's something about the way you talk about it in conjunction with Sam's work that is just like a lighthouse. Sam explains what's happening in the mind of the narcissist, and then you're explaining the other side.
Yeah, and that's the most important, I think, message for survivors is that there is a way back. There is a way back, and it doesn't exist just by circling around the recovery space forever, trying to work them out. It exists within you, and exists. But the problem is, it's so hard to see unless we've got the right tools to see it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's a complex thing, so it takes complexity to see it.
Yeah.
It's probably the hardest thing about my work is that it is complex, but the mind's a complex thing. It is a complex thing. And that's why my books are in a part A and part B. So part A is the full theory, and then part B is an exact mirror copy in layman's terms. So it runs through it in plain English,
Amazing.
no jargon, no theory, just runs through it in plain English for you. And
Yeah.
I did it well. I have to say, I wanted to make sure
Right.
that I completed the arc properly, so people could find themselves in it no matter where they are.
Yes.
Because collapse is so hectic, sometimes you could be an inverse mirrored reflexive apathy, and then all of a sudden you can go back right into collapse-induced psychotic regression. Because in many ways it's just a lessening collapse. It's lessening collapse that has different signatures as you go through it.
It's reducing the intensity of it, like, over time, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think for me, I used to be, I guess, kind of obsessed with, like, what is happening with a narcissist? Why are they this way? What happened? Why did now it's like, what's happening here with me? And what can I do as a person to re-engage with that life I had before myself? Not the, because it's accepting responsibility, and like Sam says, why did you agree to participate in the shared fantasy? What something in you that was not right, not well.
Yeah, there was something stood forward. Something came forward that enjoyed and delighted in being idealized in.
Right.
And it's a critical part of the healing. It really is. There's no shortcuts to this. There's no easy way out of it, as you know. And we get terribly impatient with ourselves. We want to heal now, tomorrow. I want to be healed yesterday because this is so painful. And it's we all go through that. I think the thing is about narcissistic abuse, we're all going to go through a pattern. The first pattern is going to be like the split, idealizing, unable to find anger, only able to find longing and collapse and heartbreak. And eventually then anger arrives, but anger doesn't arrive cleanly. It arrives as this internalized rage at ourselves. And the rage just becomes profound. The anger levels that I managed to find inside myself towards me, not others, not other people, me, pure self-loathing,
Like,
yeah, and it's destruction, it's like self-destruction. And then the anger gets so big that it nearly appears like an external object. It appears like it's bearing down on top of you. Like anger all of a sudden is just explosive. And I don't mean that you're going out and you're being explosively angry with other people, but you're being explosively angry with yourself, with the whole scenario, with your breakdown, with hallucinated conversations that you're having with people. You want to know why they've done this to you. You're screaming at them outside. You're screaming at them. When I say outside, I mean outside of your head.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
all
you're
here.
having, we're having hallucinated, full on arguments. And then that anger, which is justified, needs it, but it needs to be felt, because otherwise, if we don't get these negative emotions sort of in line properly, if we don't put them where they should be, then we're going to stay in that loop. We're going to keep being in disgust. And then I think we have another sort of loop that we go through, and that's the recovery space. We tend to watch a lot of nonsense for a long time because we want to be stuck in that all good, all bad. They're all evil. They're just this, they're just that. And yeah, these people do some terrible things, some awful things happen to them, both in the relationship and especially afterwards. Some really bad things happen.
Yeah.
Computers hacked, photographs put up on social media, the most inappropriate photograph you can think of, by the way. And I'm talking CSAM, trying to ruin lives and all sorts of stuff. Had face looked at it, all sorts, And as much as I could get angry about that and be incredibly, which I was at the time, and it caused a lot of internal dysregulation. It caused me and my partner a lot of dysregulation because she had to witness me going through it all. And these people do some really awful, awful things. There's no doubt about it. They cause a lot of damage and do some terrible things. But even still, that's nothing to do with me. It's not my actions. It's not something that I should be feeling in any way dysregulated about that has any responsibility on who I am and what my self-identity is. So eventually, whenever we do find the right work with Professor Vaknin and a few others, then we start bringing a bit of understanding and a bit of logic, and a bit of self-education, and a lot of introspection, a lot of soul searching, a lot of looping, a lot of trying to work out what the truth is, trying to understand ourselves, and eventually we become, I think, quite well educated in psychology, But I don't have a psychological background, by the way, I'm just a survivor.
I almost just assume that you have
No,
studied law
no,
for 50,000 years. So,
I know. I only started studying this in 2019. I don't have any exams behind me for psychology. I was too ill to go to university. I couldn't. I tried on several occasions, but it just couldn't happen. I couldn't leave the house. I've got CPTSD. You know,
oh,
I've diagnosed CPTSD
yeah,
because of it, and it was incredibly devastating. So yeah, this is all self education.
yeah,
This dedication to this is probably 30 odd thousand hours of studying, watching,
yeah,
learning, reading, writing. So
yeah,
I always encourage people to pick up the pen and get writing, get cathartic, get things down, start being creative, get your right brain creative again. The right brain wants to be intuitive. So it needs to be intuitive in the right way. It needs to be creative. It needs
yeah.
to start thinking properly and joining up again with the left hemisphere and getting narrative right. Because if we're not restoring our narrative, then we're letting the narrative be stolen. And if we're letting the narrative be stolen, then our self concept's really going to struggle to rebuild itself and come back. You could think of your observer in that regard being your competent self. You know, you could think of your sort of not your mute child, but your kind of adolescent self, your child self wanting to play again, and play being through creativity. And it's all part of that developmental sequence, of teaching the self concept how to come back online through being a child, through being a sort of adolescence, to being a teenager, to being a young adult, to being an adult again. I always talk about the comeback from collapse is becoming an adult. It's growing up,
It's growing up again.
growing up again. Because people will feel the smallness of themselves during the collapse. You'll feel small. You'll feel
Yeah.
childlike. You'll
Yes.
you'll be like, why am I so emotionally dysregulated? I am. It feels like I'm a child again.
You
And
feel like a helpless baby.
and the reason is because you are looking through your child eyes.
There you go.
You're looking through your younger version of yourself. But there is hope. There is it's great hope. And
Yeah.
as long as you diligently, and I think this is the key. We can't do this in a half-hearted manner. We have to be diligent about our healing, because otherwise you will just stay in, you know, narcissistic forums where you're just going to be filled full of anger and victimhood,
Yeah.
and you end up in this really rather grandiose state of being the biggest victim ever, uh, where what you really need to be is humble about it all. And I know that's difficult, but we do need to be humble about it all and try and concentrate on ourselves, because to do it any other way is to keep existing in that inverted pseudo narcissistic structure where you're self-supplying this absence like the narcissist does, trying to reconfigure the mind inside by giving it animation, through
Yeah.
our own psychic investment. We need to stop snapshotting like the narcissist. We need to come back to reality. It was a reality event,
Yes. Right.
or
And
in more certain terms, it was an on-reality event. You know, we thought it was reality, but it was far from it. I mean, it's fascinating learning about narcissistic personality disorder. It truly is.
sure.
It's one of the most fascinating subjects you can ever get your teeth into. But it's even more fascinating to learn about yourself properly,
Mm,
you know.
yeah.
And it doesn't come through this amazing self-love that just arrives. It comes through curiosity. It
Mhm.
comes through, saying to yourself, well, why am I like that? What were my patterns throughout life?
Yeah.
Who did I hang about with? What were my friends like? What relationships did I find myself sort of negating myself over, erasing myself for? as I said earlier, what's the relationship like, mum and dad?
Yeah.
How do I feel about myself in general? So there's just loads and loads of work to be done, but the work has to be fairly well thought out. And I don't mean like you have to have go and plan it out all yourself and so on, but you need to be careful what you're consuming, because if we just keep consuming the content that's full of hate, then it will be hate that stays. And you're gonna remain stuck in negative energy and negative emotions. You're not gonna find that positivity inside you again. You're not gonna find that resolve in you that used to exist, that had a positive way of seeing life. You're not gonna find that true attachment to
Yeah.
love again, and we all want to be loved and held and contained and heard in this world, and I think finding somebody who is there for you, a good anchor and a good emotional anchor who's going to listen to you, a good person is somebody who will not try and force you to stop collapsing. A good person will be somebody who will let you collapse and sit with you and listen to you and not try to fix the problem, not try to re-narrate your story for you, So whenever I have clients coming to me now, I let them talk. I try to find out what it is that's going on. Where in the loop are we? How do you see just how do you see yourself? What way are you feeling? What voices are in control? What regime is in control? So yeah.
So good, Mark. I'm just really grateful. 'Cause I think this, like we said, we talked about what we wanted to get out of this conversation. And you said the biggest thing for me is that I want people to know that there is hope. And I know you and I, maybe further along in our journey, or well, obviously for me, I still, I know I can get out of it, and I know that it's going to be okay. But if someone's really early on and they're mid collapse, or they're like realizing something was off, and maybe that wasn't, I'm not a narcissist, but maybe they somehow settled up on this, just know that you're not alone.
Yeah. To know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
Not alone at all. And the collapse has clinical markers. It's very clear clinical signature. It's because it is full of annihilatory dread. We've moved from the external to the internal. We've lost the ability to find positive emotions. We've got now a very chaotic collapsed mind that is full of voices and doesn't belong to us. None of it belongs to us. That's the thing. The majority of what's there doesn't belong to us. And this is the whole thing about reintegration. You can only integrate what's yours. You can't integrate what doesn't belong to you. So the hope belongs to you, the longing belongs to you, but the contempt that exists underneath it, all the antagonism that exists underneath it, it's not yours. That belongs to somebody else. Your true self will never punish you. It may be very blunt with you. It may ask you for honesty, but it's never going to punish you. It's always going to try and love you, help you.
Beautiful. Well, and I think that might be a good place to wrap up, just because people hope that, I could do 3 more hours question. But you're just reminding people that the mind and the true part of you doesn't. It's like you.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It has to be like a yeah. Do you want to recover is a very good question for people.
You want to.
Yeah, you have to ask yourself that question. Because otherwise you will just stay in that same spot, unfortunately.
Yes.
And that will devastate you for a long, long, long time. You've got to go inside, got to be diligent, you've got to be patient. Nothing's going to come tomorrow. Nothing's going to come next week. Nothing might even come next year. But eventually, it comes back again, and things do start coming back online, and we can rejoin life. And in whatever capacity that we had joined it before, we might not be quite the same person again. I don't think we ever do get back to being the same person after an event like this. So we come out of it a lot stronger, a lot
Yeah.
more knowledgeable about both outside people, about other people's psychology, but more importantly, we become much more aware of our own. We become much more, I think, sort of knowing self becomes a sort of mantra for us.
Yes.
We have to become knowing self. First and foremost, we need to find out who we are before we can truly love ourselves. And not in some sort of narcissistic sense, but in enough of a way that we don't let another absence back into our lives. And I think that's the key thing.
Because you don't need that absence to realize your full potential. That's something we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because an absence creates a lot of trouble, and a lot of ego defenses.
Yes. Well, again, thank you so much, Mark. I'm really grateful that
Thank you for having me on.
yeah, no, I really appreciate your work. For those of you who are interested in reading Mark's books, learning more about the brilliant work he's done in conjunction with Sam, check the show notes. We got the organizing gate, Mirrored Psychic Inversion Theory.
Yep, Narcissistic Redeemer, bringing you back from collapse. And then the Bible. This is the book of all books. This is Sam's Malignant Self-Love. I cannot recommend this highly enough. And this book means the world to me. I didn't have a book. Sam gave me this in May. He signed it for me and has a nice little message for me inside. But again, it's another reason the books themselves are available online free of charge at the Vaknin Rangleveska Foundation website. You can download the PDFs. And myself, from my own socials, you'll find me on Mark Thomas Beare on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, which I don't really use. TikTok's just there to make videos and edit them. I have no real interest in it. No, I have no interest in it. It's just not the place for my work, I don't think. Or you'll find me on Unboxing Narcissistic Abuse on Facebook. I tried to change it to Mark T. Beare, but it won't let me. So it's hard to stay with it.
Well, when this goes live,
I'll send you the links.
Yes. And then if you're hearing this right now as a listener, look below whatever platform you're on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We'll put the links to everything that Mark just mentioned. His books, the free resources, all of that. But yeah, Mark, thank you for helping me make sense of all the things in life. And hopefully this episode, we can turn it into what our goal was just a beacon of hope for anyone who's going through collapse or kind of trying to figure it out.
Cool. I really appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. And good luck to everybody. Stay diligent, stay safe, and keep looking after yourselves.